Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Beyond the Headlines. I'm Andy Shain, managing editor for Post and Courier Columbia. Easter weekend, shoppers inside Columbiana Centre found themselves in the middle of a shootout. 9 were shot, 6 were trampled in the escape. How did a 4-year-old beef over another shooting lead to this, and what has changed? I'm here chatting with the reporters who covered the story for us. And this story made international headlines, so it was very much of a big deal. I'm here with Post and Courier reporters, Stephen Fastenau and Mike Fitts, and Post and Courier State House reporter, Nick Reynolds. Thank you all for being here today, guys. Before we begin, I wanted to let you know that our email addresses and Twitter handles will be in the Zoom chat usually to the right of your screen. You just hit the chat button. And also, we will answer questions if you do submit some to us that we can answer. You just hit that question button and we'll see what we can do. We're going to start off with Nick Reynolds. Of course, Nick, seems kind of odd. Hey, why is the State House reporter here? Well, that was because Nick was at the mall shortly before the shooting took place. So, Nick, what was the mall like on that Easter Saturday?
Oh, well, I remember the reason that I went there that morning. It was kind of a slow day, and it was actually, really rainy outside. Kind of a miserable day. And I was actually planning to, head upstate to do some hiking. Figured I should probably do something else to fill my time. And I thought, maybe like a trip to the suburbs for, just to walk through the mall window shop and eat some, crappy mall food is probably the best thing to do today. So drove out. Going through, like, looking at shoes, shirt and tie sets I can't afford. They're like $60-$70 for a shirt and tie now. Can you believe that? And it just seemed like a lot of people had the same idea. I know that there was a University of South Carolina women's basketball player who was at the mall that day. There were a bunch of families. The Easter Bunny was set up just outside the food court taking pictures with people, and it was a really bustling and busy day at the mall. Actually went through the food court about 20-30 minutes before the shooting apparently started. And it was packed with families. Like, there was barely a free table anywhere, long lines for the Chick-fil-A. It was really a bustling and busy day.
Really sounds like a normal day at the mall. For anyone who's been to Columbiana Centre, especially on a Saturday, a holiday Saturday, that sounds about right. So you leave the mall, and then there's sort of word, of course, that the shooting has taken place. What was it like outside the mall? And talk a little bit about what it took to get to the staging area where police were.
Yeah, and I actually had a pretty good view of what the traffic scene was like outside, just because we actually left the food court because it was so busy to go and get food at a nearby spot. And then that was when we got word from the crime alerts locally that there was something going on at the mall, and had to rush over there to check it out. So we ended up being gridlocked in traffic, just trying to leave the parking lot of one of the adjacent shopping centers. And I just pulled into a Circle K and just left my car there, figuring that the police were probably preoccupied and didn't have time to tow someone's vehicle. And I just sort of watched the intersection and talked to people who were leaving the mall. And there was just a steady stream of cars coming out. The traffic on the adjacent boulevard was jam-packed. Saturday traffic in that area is already congested enough, but it was probably backed up a good quarter mile as cars were just constantly streaming out of the parking lot. And meanwhile, you just had dozens of police cars zooming in from a bunch of different agencies. I think I counted, maybe 4 or 5 different ones on my hand in the first 20 minutes, and other ones would start to come in shortly afterward. And meanwhile, in the parking lot, it emptied out very quickly, but there were some people who, were just milling about, watching what was still happening. You could see store employees, huddled in between their vehicles. I talked to a mall security guard and some employees at Spencer's Gifts, who were just camping out, and just asked what their experience was. And they were rather removed from the shooting when it happened, and they just recounted they saw chaos and just kept going. One guy I was talking to at the Circle K just said he just saw people running, and when you see people running, you go with the crowd. It seemed like there was a panic that ensued very shortly after shots rang out.
And I take it all the police cars. How did the police cars navigate through all the traffic? Were they like on medians and how did they get through it? If
Oh yeah,
folks could?
Yeah, they zoomed right through the middle of the street. They set up barricades fairly quickly at the outside of the parking lot, so nobody could get in. So once they got to the edge of it, it was fairly easy to get there. I actually had to get to the parking lot in the staging area on foot. That was the only real way to access it. And yeah, even after the press conference recanting what happened finished, they wouldn't even let me cut through the mall parking lot. They told me to walk around and get to my car that way. But yeah, it was a very chaotic scene.
Well, we appreciate that you ran. I think because you had a few minutes to make it when they originally scheduled the news conference, so you ran there. And this is a good one of the things why we do Beyond the Headlines is to help educate readers on what we do and how we do. And this is a great example with Nick. Here is a reporter who doesn't cover typically every day kind of courts and cops and things like that, police actions and things like that. And he was there and recognized this was a story and reached out. He actually reached out to me and said, I'm here and how can I help? And that's really important for all of our reporters that, just because you have a beat or a certain role, when you're out and you see news, you come and tell your bosses about it and you report on it and obviously get your cardio in unintentionally. As it were, but really appreciate that Nick did that. And again, that's what we do in this business. And speaking of doing a little explaining, I'm going to go turn the questioning to Stephen Fastenau. Stephen, you were part of the first day coverage of breaking news. This is a big breaking news story, a lot of things happening. Can you tell folks out there a little bit what it's like to be part of this, of a team putting together a story like this? Because in addition to Nick, we also had Steve Garrison, one of our editors in Charleston, helping along.
It's really fast paced early on. I was just sitting at home, on the bed, I think, watching TV or doing a bunch of nothing because it was, like you said, it was kind of a rainy day and not a lot going on, but you kind of snap into action. I think I saw probably tweets first from the police department that there were shots fired. Then, like you said, just reach out and say, "Hey, I'm monitoring this. I know there's something going on. I'm ready to start writing." But I think what's helpful in a situation like this is we've kind of been in this remote work for a couple of years now, and this is just in a breaking news situation like this, you're already plugged in on Slack, which is our our workspace that we use online. It's easy to connect with people who are in downtown. We call it downtown as Charleston. Able to kind of work together. We had Steve, who's already on call in Charleston, touch base with him and let him know, hey, I'm starting to file. I'm going to write a few paragraphs. We're going to get something online that there's a shooting. And then I'm going to head straight there. That was my plan. I was going to go straight to the mall. So I wrote a few paragraphs, got that posted, got in my car, drove probably a little excessive speed, knowing that all the law enforcement in the area is probably on the way out to the mall. And then I think at some point I was on I-26 when I got the call that Nick was already out there. So I hopped off on, I think, Piney Grove Road in the Sportsman's Warehouse parking lot. Just kind of hung out in my car, made sure that we had whatever information we knew at the time was in the story. And then just decided to go back home and kind of man the computer and help kind of feed the story. And that's, in a situation like this, it's good to have one person that's in front of the computer. They're monitoring social media for any updates from police or other agencies, any news releases that come in, working the phones. And then you got another reporter like Nick who's on the ground and able to kind of feed either via text or from Slack just what he's seeing and be able to wait for news conference with official sources, because that's what everybody's waiting for. Word from Chief Skip Holbrook, who's supposed to talk. And until then, it's just a lot of speculation, a lot of rumors. And I was able to, just while I'm hanging out in my bedroom with my computer and I'm making calls and going down the list of stores at the mall and trying to reach anybody who was there to try to share, what they saw and heard, because you kind of saw eventually that police were going through systematically and clearing everybody out of the mall. So anyway, it's a lot of teamwork, a lot of over communication, making sure everybody's on the same page.
No, and that's for sure. And what we're trying to do at this point is have funnel stories to one writer, someone who's assembling feeds from Nick, who was on the scene. You know, Stephen, you were collecting things, and then Steve Garrison was sort of, I think you and Steve were kind of shepherding that through. And it was good to have an editor, and also to have, and I was out of town, but I was sort of grabbing a couple of facts and just sending them away, and also helping Steve Garrison coordinate a little bit. But it's just interesting how this all kind of how this kind of thing gets together, how the sausage gets made on a breaking news story like this, when you see multiple bylines on a story like this. So let's go back to what happened. So where we were with the story was that Nick had obviously told us about how the police were around, they were getting through, they'd sort of blocked off the mall, had tried to evacuate the mall. You know, during the week after that, we heard that they were looking for 3 shooters after this gunfire. What did we learn about the motivation behind the shooting, as each of them apparently, you know, where they were arrested kind of one by one during the week and brought into bond court?
Yeah, so the first thing we heard, first man arrested was Llewellyn Price, and he turned himself in on site. He, I guess, according to his attorney, called his family. He waited in a car. He talked to police, and he was arrested that day. And so the first thing we heard really about, as far as the narrative, was, you know, his initial bond hearing, his attorney, Todd Rutherford, said that he was acting in self-defense, that the two other people who fired shots at the mall had targeted Price over the course of the past 4 years. They had threatened him and tried to attack him on multiple occasions, and that this was documented in police reports. And so we learned a little bit more as the week went on. I think Robinson was arrested next. And then after 4 days, Marquise Robinson is the second man arrested. Mm-hmm. The third man was Amari Smith. And what we learned from prosecutors and from Rutherford, Price's attorney, is that this stemmed from a shooting in 2018. Lower Richland High School basketball player Amon Rice was among dozens of people who were involved in a big fight, like a physical fist fight, out in the Lower Richland area, Eastover. There was a festival that was going on out there. This spilled over. There are two groups of people agreed to meet in a church parking lot and kind of settle this. At some point, shots were fired. Amon Rice was struck and killed with a bullet. Numerous people were charged in his death. I don't think they ever determined really who fired the fatal shot. One of those people who was charged at the time was Llewellyn Price. And Price eventually was, the case was brought to a grand jury, and they declined to prosecute. So there was not enough evidence to prosecute him in that case. So to hear Rutherford's description, since that time, Robinson and Smith, who were close to Rice in some way, have targeted him. And when they at the mall that day, he says Price acted in self-defense. These guys trying to kill him, and he responded as one would trying to be killed, which he tried to protect himself. Now the prosecutors say this is a mutual combat situation. All 3 of these guys showed up with guns to a crowded mall. They engaged in a shootout. They knew what they were doing when they arrived at the mall. They're going to have a showdown at the mall. So it's kind of setting up the two sides a little early as to what we're going to see maybe in court.
And just a reminder to folks who are out there, please, if you have some questions, just hit the Q&A button, and we'll be happy to leave some time and answer some questions if we get them. So Stephen, victims spoke during the court hearings. You also interviewed some people, some witnesses afterwards. What did they describe the scene like, and what kind of impact has it had on them?
I think Nick touched on it earlier, but it was just chaos. Nobody I talked to said they saw three guys pull guns and start firing. All they know is the sound of gunshots, and then people in terror running for their lives. And in court, that was, I think, the most kind of the most impactful or powerful testimony in court was from a young woman who said she was knocked to the ground. There was a father running with his child in the stroller, knocked this woman on the ground. She smashed her face on the floor. She had a bandage over her eye. She has bruises. It had only been a couple of days since the shooting, and she was already certain that this was going to follow her for the rest of her life. She said when she hears hail on a roof, she hears loud noises, she's never going to feel completely safe in a public space again. And I think that was kind of my takeaway, is just anybody who went to the mall that day, including Nick, who was there. You don't expect something like that to happen. It's the day before Easter Bunny. I think everybody was kind of a mixture of shock that something like that would happen, and anger. I think there was frustration. I talked to a father who was there with his family. His wife was there shopping for clothes for a new job. He was with his, I think, 11-year-old son and 4-year-old daughter. They were in separate stores. He let his son go in a shoe store across the corridor while his wife and daughter were shopping for, earrings and that sort of thing. And he was just hanging out in the main corridor of the mall when the shooting began. And he's got one child in one store and the rest of his family in another store. And he had to sit there and think about what to do, and ran back and forth to make sure everybody's safe. And I think his ultimate takeaway was something more needs to be done for mall security. I think he was in favor of metal detectors or whatever it takes for people to feel safe going back to the mall. But it's a lot of that in the week after is still fresh on everybody's mind. I think it was probably people still trying to grapple with what they had experienced. And then there's a victims advocate in court who kind of described what some other people had experienced. There's an older lady, 73 years old, who has some kind of life-altering injury, and she was in the hospital the longest. There's a 16-year-old girl who was shot in the back, an inch from her spine. A pregnant woman was hit by a bullet. So, when the prosecutor says it was miraculous that nobody was killed, it sounds, that sounds true to me, just from what we know so far.
And the sense you get from talking to these folks was that they would never have thought this would happen at a place like this. That you're walking near the Gap essentially, and a shootout takes place.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's probably, it's in our society and our culture where these things are in headlines every day. It's probably maybe not so much. I think the kids are in school. They do active shooter drills now. It's probably sad, but I'm sure it wasn't a complete surprise. Just maybe one of those things where you never expect it to happen to you. But from what we understand, the mall, mall staff and employees of stores knew how to act. They pulled down the metal gates you see when stores closed. They sheltered customers and employees in storage rooms. So it was almost like, it's terrifying, but people knew what to do, and they kind of sprung into action right away, which is, probably an indictment on how often these things are in the news and what steps, businesses and schools have to take to make sure people are prepared in case this happens.
Well, speaking of the mall, Mike Fitts covers retail business for us. And I asked Mike, and I talked about doing a story about, of course, the impact on the mall afterwards. Mike, you visited the mall a few times the week after the shooting. Talk a little bit about what you saw those first days, and did it seem to be affecting business?
Yes, I was in the mall Monday, which was the first day that it was open again. They closed for the rest of Saturday and Sunday. And I was there on Monday. And it seemed, if you were not looking for it, it would have been easy for shoppers to overlook what had happened. It was a fairly quiet day, although I heard from the management company that they thought that their numbers were about typical for a Monday at Columbiana, not a big day for them. And there were some folks in all different parts of the mall, food court, shopping, a few folks with kids, for school break type things. But you still had a row of shops near the scene that were closed. And at least 3 of them had signs saying, "We hope you understand we're not open today. We will be open again on Wednesday or Thursday," including the Gap, which was right there in that center section of the mall. Also, but if you tried to be observant, as I walked around, I noted that numerous stores in the mall on their glass door or glass by their entrances had a big X had been written on the side. And I believe that's from law enforcement going through that Saturday and clearing spaces and marking spaces as cleared. So the fact that people were just shopping around and those things there struck me a little bit as one of the bits of evidence that you saw. You saw also more presence of mall security, both in the parking lot and in the halls, especially that area of the hall, it seemed like. Even later in the week, you saw police were still at the scene or on the scene, plainclothes, and also, it's a normal day in the mall except for the crime scene van that is parked out by the food court entrance. So, but very quickly later in the week, Wednesday and Thursday, those shops that were closed were all reopened by Thursday. And it was very much by Thursday a scene of very much back to pretty much normal business for the most popular mall in the Midlands. People were there. Somebody on Monday, in fact, told me, "I came on Monday because I figured security would be really high after what happened on Saturday." So I was struck by Wednesday and Thursday, how quickly it became Columbiana that we've all shopped in at one time or another.
You talk to the mall owners, the mall operators, Mike. What changes, besides, of course, the security, but what other things have they done, or did they do, at least in that or say they were going to do, in response to what happened?
Well, you did have more presence in the short term of mall security, and mall security who looked like they were taking their work quite seriously. They were not just hanging out in the parking lot. They were looking around to see what people were up to, heading up and down the rows. And you did have, at least in the short term, increased presence from law enforcement. I saw Columbia PD there in added numbers on both Wednesday and Thursday. Also on Thursday, the mall had brought in a dog sniffer team. They had a dog that was going to be there, they said, at certain intermittent times, that can sniff out firearms. They can literally find people in the mall who have a concealed handgun on them and sniff them out. And those people, the mall owners said, would be asked to leave and not to come back with a firearm on their person. The question was mentioned earlier of metal detectors, and the management company said they had no plans at that time and have made no move to install metal detectors. And that's understandable, at least in one way, when you think about the layout of a big American mall like Columbiana Centre. It has numerous entrances, both main entrances that go straight into department stores like Belk and Dillard's, and into a restaurant or a bar right there. So going to a situation where it had metal detectors would be quite an undertaking and would probably involve closing some entrances that businesses would prefer stay open, probably.
Nick, real quick, back to you, because you covered the State House. There was a little bit of a reaction at the State House about maybe dealing with gun laws, because some of the, at least the first person who was arrested had been, had faced a gun charge that seemed to not be an issue. Talk a little bit about what they're doing, what they're discussing, at least at the State House. I know we're in the final days, but maybe there may be something next year about how to reform or fix some of these gun charges or how these gun charges are handled.
Yeah, that's correct. Shortly after the shooting, Senator Dick Harpootlian from here in Columbia actually brought up that he was going to be introducing an amendment to an existing bill to increase the mandatory minimum sentences for illegal gun possession. There's already mandatory minimums on the books, but they are actually not really high enough to, I guess, merit the level of crime that he said, or to serve as an effective enough deterrent. So what this would do was introduce mandatory year minimums for your first and second sentences, the first one being a misdemeanor, the second one being a felony, with a higher financial and maximum prison sentences for those convicted of a felony illegal gun possession. Governor Henry McMaster said shortly after he introduced those that if they were introduced, he would sign them. And I believe those were discussed earlier this week. I'd have to double check on the status of that legislation right now. But essentially, talking to the senator shortly after he introduced that amendment on the Senate floor, we got into a bigger discussion of whether I guess in this case, what some might see as a punitive measure for gun control, as it was equated to by some Democrats, was really the best way to solve the problem. And he essentially said that this isn't the wholesale solution. This is illegal gun possession, especially in Columbia, is much more significant problem than just trying to increase penalties for those who violate the law. But it's a good start to at least close some of the oversights that we might have in existing statute.
And Stephen, real quick, just talk a little bit about an effort that some Columbia City leaders are having in create what they want to create a gun court that would look at gun charges.
Yeah, that's something that Councilman Joe Taylor kind of floated as a possibility earlier this year. He said, "Hey, this is an acceptable use of federal COVID relief money if we create a special court, and it wouldn't be a city court." I think his idea was kind of a circuit, a circuit court, a state court that would help expedite gun cases in areas of the state that are experiencing maybe more gun crime. So if you think your bigger cities, Charleston, North Charleston, Greenville, but that's a concept at this point. I don't think it's progressed much beyond that. But this council, maybe more so than you got a couple new members seated, I think, with Mayor Daniel Rickeman and Joe Taylor, especially, are really drumming public safety. I think you might see some policy, some new policy moving forward related to that, but it's kind of yet to be seen. Right now, it's just a promise of we're going to continue to fully fund police and give them everything that they need to do their job. So it'll be interesting to see, how this particular incident might affect discussions, especially now that we're in, budget season, when they're putting together a budget for next year.
Right. Well, I want to thank everyone for obviously watching today, and for those of you who are going to maybe watch us on YouTube or a video of this later. I want you to keep up with Nick with his State House coverage. Mike's going to be obviously continuing, as he always, doing a great job covering retail. And goodbye to Stephen. Stephen's going to be leaving us next week to join the Department of Natural Resources. Stephen's been a very good reporter for us and a very good colleague. So good luck to you. Stephen. For those of you who signed up for this chat, you'll get a link to this chat. It'll be emailed to you. For those, if you know someone who wants to watch this but maybe didn't sign up for it, it will be on our YouTube page and pretty soon, so you can catch up with it there. Just a couple of quick reminders. A great way to sort of, if you're not a subscriber to the Post and Courier, to get to know us, is to subscribe to our newsletters. We have a bunch of them. In Columbia alone, we have a newsletter, a business newsletter that Mike's a big part of. We have a newsletter that I put together each week. We have a newsletter for what to do on the weekend and for food, as well as for Gamecock sports. And also, if you're liking what we're doing, please subscribe. It helps pay for the journalism that we do. If you're already a subscriber, I want to thank you. And if you aren't a subscriber, let me thank you soon enough. So please do that. Again, everybody have a good week, a safe week, and be good. Cheers.